To close the day, we're delighted to have the opportunity to hear from Senator Risa Ontiveros, who, before becoming a legislator, Senator Ontiveros was one of 27 Filipinas nominated to the Nobel Peace Prize in 2005 for their work in the peace movement. Senator Ontiveros is not only an experienced mediator, but is also known for her tireless promotion of women's rights. Just in her first term, I read this in her bio and couldn't help but highlight this particular issue. Senator Ontiveros successfully championed the expanded maternity leave law in the Philippines, which gives working moms 105 days of paid maternity leave in the Philippines. Really. So, Senator, I'd like to invite you to reflect on stage with us. Just to reflect on your experience as a mediator, and particularly whether you think the strategies you used as part of the civil society movement are still relevant today, given the socio-political and the economic context that has changed. I'm going to give you the stage, and we're really looking forward to hearing your remarks.
Oh no, you're leaving?
I'm leaving you.
Okay. Well, good afternoon or evening to everyone in the room. Gracias, Elena. And hello again to old friends and comrades like Pancho and Ted and fellow women leaders like Ms. Aliyah. I'm really sorry I missed your session with Sir. Just the ending was so interesting. I should have come earlier and heard everything. And everyone in the room, good evening, good afternoon. I think the talk points I prepared are different from what Elena just asked, so I'll follow your lead and take off from there. As Pancho and Ted know, I spent years in the peace movement here in the Philippines. First, by drafting a concept which I call the People's Christmas Ceasefire way back in 1987, only almost 40 years ago. This was when the peace talks between the Philippine government and the National Democratic Front still not successfully concluded until now, unlike the peace processes in the Bangsamoro. The peace talks had just collapsed. And I read what other peace movements in other countries were doing. For example, calling for ceasefires on certain days in certain areas of the country so that UNICEF could go in and vaccinate the kids of the government soldiers, the kids of the non-state actor. We didn't have that term yet then, I think, but now we call them that. And UNICEF then called it Shots for Peace, and other peace processes going on. And so I just wrote up something called the People's Christmas Ceasefire, showed it to some other friends who were in the cause-oriented movement then. We didn't call it civil society yet. And asked, is there any movement or community here who'd be interested to do something like this? Because, you know, the late, great, and still beloved Cory Aquino had unsheathed the sword of war, and the armed forces and the New People's Army, and sometimes even worse, the paramilitary groups operating under the cover of the state were at each other's throats again. And of course, many civilians were getting caught in the crossfire. So I was led to this wonderful group with whom I stayed for years after that, called Coalition for Peace. That's where Pancho and I think also Ted and many comrades in the peace movement met up over the next several years. We started first with really community-based peace processes, which we called People's Christmas not the People's Christmas Ceasefire, we call them peace zones, different models of peace zones in different parts of the country. We did things like immunization for peace, copied practically from what UNICEF was doing in Latin America. We went into grassroots IHL training in partnership with the ICRC here in the Philippines. And eventually, Coalition for Peace gave birth to other peace movements, like the National Peace Conference. This is the one multi-sectoral that came up with like a people's peace agenda from different sectors, different regions. And then particular to, sorry, this is just a long introduction to trying to think aloud on Elena's question, to groups like the, what did we call ourselves? MSPA, Multisectoral Peace Advocates. And this was the one that really tried to play not an insider partial role like some wonderful combatants and former combatants then who brought their experience from inside, whether the armed forces or the armed revolutionary movements, to the negotiating table. But what MSPA tried to do was to be the citizens or civilians, like third party at the table, to first to push the combatants back to the table, and then to try to help facilitate the process through various peacemaking and peace building tools, which we had also learned, for example, from indigenous peoples in the Cordilleras, where they patterned their peace zones in those the first community-based efforts I shared with you, to shape their model of the peace zones. So at the table, peace advocates try to bring these agenda, bring these peacemaking and peace building mechanisms that communities were using on the ground, and try to create a conducive environment. We would do back channeling with both parties, government and the NDF, Communist Party of the Philippines, No People's Army. So, and I mean, thank you for your question, Elena, because now it makes me wonder, would those peacemaking and peace building strategies and dispositions still be useful today? I caught the last part of the previous wonderful conversation, and also in the context of the geopolitics in which the Philippines, I guess like all our other countries, has always been embedded until today. The earlier conversation partners of Elena were talking about the West Philippine Sea, and of course, many Filipinos are also in agony. No offense. Well, people have different feelings about what happened in the U.S. I don't want to offend anyone in the room who might have a different feeling, but many Filipinos are rather in agony about it. Thinking also, how will what happens in just the most powerful and rich country in the world, our former colonial master, how it will affect things here. The second part of your question was, we're like in a talk show, and we're
I feel like I threw a curveball at you, so
sorry.
so I think you should just share with us, continue sharing with us your thoughts. My question was just about your experience and how it applies to the situation. Do you think that the same strategies that you used then would work now? But this is wonderful.
I guess like all strategies for all the different stuff we try to do in our lives, I guess they do and they must evolve over time. It's been some years since different organizations in the peace movements here in the Philippines maybe have been able to try to work alongside or inside or just outside an armed conflict in such a raw way that we used to with the armed conflict between government and the National Democratic Front, and government and the armed Bangsamoro revolutionary movements in what is now the BARM. And we certainly, as expressed toward the end of the previous conversation, we certainly hope that no hot conflict will spark ever in the West Philippine Sea or anywhere else in the South China Sea. So, but I think maybe the attitude is probably the same for Filipino peace activists now, looking at still ongoing conflicts and potential conflicts. Of course, not to speak of the economic contradictions, always at the roots of armed conflict anyway. Why people have to take up arms, as all our peoples have at some point in our history. And I know your community also focuses a lot on the ecology, and we know that what happens to Mother Earth, Mother Nature, is so much a factor also in our conflicts as this human species. So I guess the strategies and certainly the tactics would have to have evolved, but maybe um, many of the values of the past for peace builders and peacemakers, as we learned from like the Cordillerans, or for that matter the people of the Bangsamoro, who they say, especially when fighting for their ancestral domains, say that this is us since time immemorial. So I guess some values, both of the peoples who've been here longer than some of us, and movements like our peace movements, the values would and the dispositions would probably be in their essence the same, but certainly would have to evolve as responsible activists.
I'd
You.
like to ask a question. Wala yung mabanggit sa pangalan ba eh. You know, you were in the newspapers on television just 2 weeks ago for having been the single senator who stood up against former President Duterte. His intimidation tactics, his fear tactics in the Senate when he feared death. And basically, achieved a lot of recognition, I think, among different people about the role you were playing in the Senate. My question is, how much was that a challenging thing to do? And where do you get the inspiration for boldly challenging the former president, whom we all know has been involved in a lot of extrajudicial killings and continues to intimidate and sow fear among sections of the population? Where does that come from in your own personal experience?
I guess, Pancho and dear colleagues, it's the same for me as for anyone in the room. Oh, I like probably each one of you to continue on this path, to continue in this space that I've chosen, each one space and path that you have chosen. I return to my original inspirations. So, why did I become an activist? Why am I at this point in my life as an activist in formal politics, a politician? So I always return. Was it Gustavo Gutierrez who just died, who wrote about drinking from our own wells, and one of our great anti-dictatorship struggle leaders, Ka Pepe Jokno, I think paraphrased that by saying about something about drinking from our own wells also. And my wells are, for example, well, yes, also my faith. I'm one of that generation of Filipino activists who were inspired by liberation theology and even the legacy of Vatican II. That's why we mourn Gustavo Gutierrez's death also just this year, very recently. Um, and for and I think that for any person of faith or spirituality, also our comrades who are agnostics or atheists and are also people of good faith, we're all humanists. So I return to that philosophy or that spirituality. I'm very proud to be Filipino. I think each one of us was made by the universe or God, whatever we call that. It's greater than ourselves. Made us be born where we were born, not by accident, yeah, for a purpose. I'm always inspired by the beauty of nature. That's why we battle to preserve it and to enhance it. I go back always to the beauty of our different arts and cultures. Um, and of course, we all talk about the people, and of course, the first people of the people are those who love us and whom we love. So I also always go back to that. It was very challenging to uh, go to a hearing that he had confirmed he would attend. When he was in power, I never watched him on TV. I never listened to him on the radio because it was a disturbance to my soul. I would only read about him in the news because it was my responsibility to keep track of what he was doing. So, a good friend of mine advised me, and I did throughout those hours of the hearing, just keep breathing in and out. Shield your solar plexus with white and yellow light. Breathe in light. Exhale love. Very hard to exhale love towards a person like that. So just into the room. So yellow and white light, violet light, my favorite color anyway. So yeah, each of us who are activists, we do that. We just fight every day in the life we have chosen.
I think apart from the inspiration that all your words were, thank you.